Thanks, everyone. All right, well, so I think this is actually a bit of a tight schedule, but actually an opportunity to dig directly, almost as if the warm-up act was the COO of the civil service. We're going to jump straight into a fascinating conversation now about what it looks like for government departments, but also the trans-Whitehall picture of harnessing data capabilities and making an enormous difference, or the potential for an enormous difference, in the way that public services and the functions of government themselves can operate. I think we have a fantastic panel joining us here for that conversation today. Sue Bateman, as we've already heard, is the Chief Data Officer of the CDDO, the Central Digital and Data Office. Richard Corbridge is the Director General, Chief Digital Information Officer at the Department for Work and Pensions. Daljit, at the end there, Rehal, is the Chief Digital and Information Officer at HMRC, a very popular department with everyone here today. And Ed Stainton joins us and is representing our partners with today's event. He's the Director of BT Government. Thank you so much for joining us as well, Ed. Now, each of the panelists have prepared a few opening remarks, but I want this to be more of an organic conversation anyway, and of course we'll have plenty of time for audience questions too. Sue, do you mind getting the ball rolling for us?
Yeah, of course. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, not being set up to be the experts or anything from the boss, but there you go. So when I was thinking about this session this morning, I mean, it's a really big topic, isn't it? And it's really interesting that you've chosen this as one of your big strategic areas of focus, because there's so many ways that we could come into this. And I think in your opening remarks, you kind of come to some of the similar observations that I would at starting to come into this. And the first observation is that it's either seen as the problem or the answer to everything. And by answer, it's kind of data will do that for us, or problem, people aren't sharing data, that's stopping us from doing X, Y, and Z. And I think that says a lot really about where we are in terms of the journey, certainly in government and the wider public sector, about really understanding what it is that we need to do to unlock and harness the potential of data. So that's observation number one. Observation number two on the answer point is kind of also what tends to happen at times is there is one answer. In the role that I do, my team and I look at making better use of data across government and the wider public sector. And quite often when we're speaking to ministers or occasionally other senior leaders who aren't in the digital and data field, we get, well, surely if you did just this one thing, data sharing in this way around legislation or unlocking data in this way, that is the answer to everything. And as you'll all appreciate, and panel members as well, there isn't just one answer to this. There's no real one-size-fits-all, and I think you'll hear that from Rich and Daljit, from their different experiences of how they're kind of tying in data transformation into the digital journeys that they're taking. And certainly, whilst representative of some of the big departments, we also have to remember that Whitehall and then the wider public sector is very varied in the business focus that each department, each organisation has. And some departments are more policy and analytical driven than perhaps driven by the need for data for operational purposes. But I think there is a way through that. And the work that we're doing as a team is to try and look at, well, if there's not one answer fits all, how do we get to the interoperability and the digital and data transformation that we need? And I think one of the answers is by looking at standards and standardization of practice. So Alex mentioned things like the data ownership model, the work that we're doing on a data marketplace for government, where we're trying to help with the discoverability and reusability of data. And all of that is underpinned by common standards, common practice, but that allow a flexibility of adoption that reflects where a particular organisation is. So that's part of the answer. And then for me, 3 other quick areas that I'd certainly like to discuss in more detail today. I think Alex touched upon in his presentation. So what do we need to do next? So we're working really hard, and we've made great progress on laying the foundations. I think we've still got a long way to go in terms of leadership and advocacy. Quite often, data, even dare I say it, in kind of technology and digital discussions, data's not necessarily there at the forefront of people's minds of being part of a design of a service or a design of initiative, and it needs to be. And we need decision makers at the most senior boards and in those key programs who are advocating for data. Second thing is around investment in data. And I don't mean kind of, trying to boil the ocean here. There are some strategic assets. We recognise in other ways critical national infrastructure. We need to be thinking about some of our critical data assets in that way, which is why we're working with departments on essential shared data assets. And the last area that I think we touched upon, and I think pink gingham shirt kind of, with Alistair, touched upon in your question around some of the ethical dimensions of this. And I'm a really strong believer in openness and accountability in the way that we work. So, and I think as a government, back to some of the comments that were raised in Alex's session around nervousness and caution, I think we need to be bolder in the way that we think about inclusion as well. So hopefully that's given everybody some food for thought.
That's really helpful. I might do a quick follow-up for each of your comments as we go, rather than labour my own questions at the end. So, but the point you just made at the end there about the need for more boldness, a little bit more confidence, I think that sits, I think there's an extent to which, tell me how wrong I am about this, there's an extent to which the challenges we've just heard from Alex, but also that you've mentioned briefly here, create that lack of confidence, that we hold the public trust in our use of data in such high esteem that sometimes it inhibits our ability to share data effectively, that we think so much about the importance of not trying to apply one-size-fits-all solutions that it stops us from trying to find that underlying data infrastructure, the areas of shared endeavour that might help us. Does that sound right to you, or am I way off base?
I think a little bit, but I think some of the caution comes from the wider environment, and by that I mean some of the culture around traditional ways of working in the civil service, where you have kind of experts in their field, and there's a little bit of kind of reluctance to kind of be showing the workings out. And actually I've found over the years, particularly through different things that I've done through open government, even the Digital Economy Act, which was a really complex and tricky bit of legislation, that was underpinned by a year-long open policy making process, and actually opening things up early and getting different voices in the development of something like that has helped it in the longer term, and I see that. So yes, I think it's less of the thinking too hard about individual things. I think it's more of a general how do we work confidently in the open.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. Richard?
So I'd like to follow up on that as well on one thing before diving in. I think one of the things that we need to get better is asking citizens. I think the NHS spent a decade being quite scared of the Sun headline that Alex put up and others of similar nature, because the assumption was patients didn't understand or didn't want information to be shared. And I think what the NHS slowly but surely is discovering is that actually when you say to a patient, if I share your data, then these are the services and speed and efficiency and accuracy that I can open up. And I think the same probably applies to all of our government services. Make it a choice, but make it clear what you get by saying yes and what you don't get by saying no. But that's just a quick follow-up. I think it's hard what we're trying to do. This sort of data-powered government view has become more interesting in the last 18 months because of the two initials that get thrown around an awful lot. And suddenly there's a lot more focus on the things that me and Daljit and our departments and others are trying to do. But our starting point needs to be just brought back to attention as well. So in Barnsley, my hometown, a bit of a crap football team in South Yorkshire, if that counts. I'm a supporter, so I'm allowed to say that. But that's where DWP evaluates all industrial injury claims that come into DWP, of which there's still 100,000 a year of people who've had an industrial injury. It's a paper-based service. It takes an operator 6 different systems to take the pieces of paper and put it into the systems to then pass it round, healthcare people that need to look at that. I was there recently and they showed me one professional rugby player's file. He'd had a professional injury playing rugby 11 years ago. You know, the big cardboard boxes you get at IKEA? His file was in 2 of those. So to make ours a data-powered government, we've got to really think about some of the policy decisions that we took decades and decades ago that exist still and we have to run. If me and Daljit are going to join up our data to make it more efficient for citizens and to make it harder for them to make mistakes, for it easier for us to spot fraud, etc., then how do we start with 2 IKEA boxes of paper for an industrial injury claim that's 11, 12 years old? Jumping to the excitement of what we can do is absolutely valid, and trying to be less risk-averse is absolutely valid, but having a really gut-wrenching understanding of how big some of this is going to be is also really, really important. I think that we need to grapple with that as well.
That's really interesting, and I think that point about how we're constrained or we're bound by decisions taken decades ago, in this space, it often makes me think about how some of the decisions we're talking about now will bind people in 10 or 20 years' time, which I think adds another dimension to some of the kind of the lack of confidence that you both sort of mentioned here. Are we getting it right? Is the infrastructure right? We're going to be stuck with this, if experience is a guide, for a long time. So we've got to get it right. And do you think that's a kind of a psychological element here?
I think it's psychological and I think it's process as well. And in the last couple of weeks, DWP's passed its sort of a new internal rule. When it comes to implementing a new benefit policy line, the cost of turning off the old policy line and the technology data costs of doing that must be put in the business case of doing the new, which for me removes that orphan systems and orphan data and orphan benefit lines, which make up a massive, massive long tail, not of thousands and thousands of people, not many people in comparison to UC and other things, but the cost of running that is exponentially higher than the cost of running UC. And it's 100,000 people, for example, for industrial injuries. And there are many of those that are kicking around.
Yeah. Ed, should we keep going down the line? Ed, your thoughts?
Sure. Well, firstly, thank you very much for hearing my voice in this debate. So I lead the government business within BT, and that places me at the intersection of both business, technology, and government. So I get to see it from all angles, and what I'm looking to contribute to this debate is maybe some little vignettes from what I see in BT in the private sector, how that may lend itself to what's going on in government. Let me first start with a quote I heard the other day, and this came from an unsourced government official. But
Alex has left, so...
Alex has gone now, it's fine. So if you were to build a delivery machine for government right now, in this room, you wouldn't build it in the way it is constructed today. And that's just worth thinking over a bit, and probably not that helpful for this debate, because these are the cards we have been dealt with. But let me share a couple of perspectives, and I'm going to kind of put that into the what and the how. The what, for me, starts with investment. And I said I'd share a few vignettes from BT. Our investment is £5 billion a year to migrate off legacy. That includes transforming the PSTN architecture of this country onto modern IP systems. But as well as that, we're refreshing all of our technology platforms. Why are we doing that? Because we want to drive the benefits of a data-centric, a customer-centric world. So I guess my question I'm positioning to government to think about is, it's fantastic to hear Alex come up on stage and talk about the £2.6 billion of investment that are coming for legacy. But is that enough, and are we moving quick enough at pace? Is government bold enough in its ambition? Because as a big provider to government for technology services, I can tell you what, it's very difficult working with government to get government off legacy technology. So that's kind of my first point and my first challenge. The second is around automation. So there's so much talk about AI and the benefits that can bring. But actually, even in an organisation like BT, through modernising our data architecture and better understanding our customers, simple automation doesn't need to be AI. A simple automation can deliver huge benefits to an organisation. Which is my next point, which is around the benefits. Why? Why would you make the investment? Why do you want to have a data-driven, citizen or customer-centric approach to how you run your business or your government? Well, it can drive huge efficiencies. BT has now achieved its £2 billion cost-saving target. And we have publicly put out there that we're looking to reduce our workforce by 55,000 people. Now, a big part of that comes from, once we've done the fibre build, we won't need so many engineers, but there is an element where through automation, by just having a modern business on a future-built IT stack with consolidated data, we will be a more efficient, leaner business. Which then leads me to my kind of final point around skills. And I think as a large employer and government as a whole, we have a responsibility to make sure we are reskilling the workforce for this new data-driven world that we now live in. And it's our job to make sure that we're retraining. And in fact, in BT, we've run a program where we're taking people out of our contact center environment, where we're spotting them early through some sort of aptitude type tests, and then training them up to be data scientists. And I think those sorts of opportunities need to be created by organisations like ourselves. And then kind of my final point, I said I'd talk about the what and then the how. I think there's something around capability and scale that's really, really important. And what relationship does government want to have with industry and the private sector to help deliver these big, bold ambitions that you have for a data-driven, tied-up, citizen-focused society? Because I can tell you, government can't do it all on its own. I think what government really needs is national champions that step up and are incentivised to help support and lean in with a partnership to drive the sort of outcomes that citizens all expect of us.
That's really helpful, thank you. From your point of view, for having interacted so much with government in the work that you do, how have things changed recently? Is there growing appetite? Is the skills gap, the overall level of literacy and the things that need to be discussed in the mindset shifts, but also the technological changes, the platforms that get used, the need to address legacy? Is there a trajectory that you're observing in the way that government responds to some of the things you say?
There's certainly been an upskilling in general kind of knowledge and approach to the power of data and technology and the benefits that brings. But unfortunately, to my earlier point, just not moving at fast enough pace. And I think maybe the intent is there, but we're dealing with hugely complex environments. So to my first point, I said, that I referenced that quote, yeah. If we could build a perfect sort of delivery machine right now today, it probably wouldn't look like what it is. Well, actually, maybe that's the mindset we need to be in. Maybe the approach here is we need a more radical focus to how we do deal with the legacy and bring these disparate data sets together.
So a more radical, tear it up, move fast and break things kind of approach?
Yeah.
All right, which cues you beautifully, I think, Daljit.
It does. I mean, so much of what all of you have said. I'm at the end of the tunnel here, the train here. I mean, look, I recognise we have to try and square the circle between that digital ambition Alex talked about, that we all want to achieve. We can either sit here and think we won't achieve it, or we can say, actually, we're going to achieve that. So what is the world going to look like for us if you've got that frictionless way of interacting with us and you're a citizen? If all of the promise of that digital world is delivered, by some method, right, what are we left with? we're left with data. We're left with all of the things we do with our data, because once you break through and achieve that vision, you still got to do that modern slavery stuff. You still got to do the fraud. You still got to do the risk. You still got to do compliance. All of those things are driven by data, and we're not talking enough about that. A lot of this gets hijacked by just the multi-channel, omni-channel world of the ways in which you interact with us in government departments. But if we are to say, right, we're firmly behind that, we have to think about what happens once that's achieved. And this is where some of the themes that you're all mentioning really resonate with me. I do think it's time to be bold. I do think it's time to be radical. I think we can waste a lot of money taking a legacy system, which is written in COBOL, and getting it to run on a new hardware. Or we can say, actually, we should move to a platform, a cloud-native software as a service platform that comes with it, that brings with it a big data analytics platform built in. It brings the ability to actually break that cycle of business versus IT, because these platforms they come with configurability to the point where the industry calls that zero code, it calls it low code. These are the opportunities that the technology is offering us, and we're not being bold enough to take them. What that means is really, in the past, for things like case management, right now, if you've had to ask your IT people to deliver your case management solution for you in the past, today you don't need to do that anymore. Today, that is almost as trivial as creating your own macro in Excel or your own PowerPoint. That's the opportunity, because that fear we have of where the skill's going to come from. Guess what? We don't need a lot of these skills. We don't need those old skills. We need people to start preparing for the new world of platforms, which are going to be driven by AI. It's going to be embedded, analytics going to be embedded inside them. And we're not any different from the private sector, although I get where you're coming from. Yeah, I've worked in, Cellnet, Mercury Communications, Cable and Wireless. Cellnet became O2 now, I think. 3, Virgin, TalkTalk, British Gas, Centrica, NTL, Telewest. I could go on. And I can tell you, not in a single one of those organizations could I ever find anybody saying, I am happy with the data. I am happy with the data warehouse. And I think part of that being bold is to recognize why does that go wrong? I mean, telecoms, right? In your world, you've got a mobile phone and you switch from one supplier to another. The SLA is 2 hours for that portability, right? Within 2 hours, every single device connected to the internet around the world, whether it's another phone or an automated machine, within those 2 hours, and I think you're allowed up to 48 hours, so within 2 days, will be routing to the right billing engine and charging in the right way for that call with the right sort of switch over that's happened without you as a customer needing to change a number. Now you go to those people in those departments who are responsible for managing that policy. I bet you anybody they'll say, yeah, if only my MI was better. If only my reports were on time. We can do the very complex things, but we don't put enough into doing the simpler things. So I just think this is a common problem. We in the public sector lack a bit of the imagination and the entrepreneurship that exists in the private sector, which really drives a quicker decision. And that's what we struggle with. And in the end, we end up taking the approach of, I don't care if I end up spending more on this than I need to, because I want to get there in a very controlled, highly governed, process-centric world, which in the private sector, you go to the board and they say, do it. You got a business case. Is the CFO saying you got a business case? Yeah, probably, Mark Lehrer and those guys in your, well, they're just back it. We don't have the equivalence of that in government. We don't have those kinds of champions. So part of this really is learning how the private sector does that, bringing those processes inside the civil service, and also your point about not thinking we can do this on our own. But the good news I want to leave you with on my opening is there is a really exciting world being opened up for us, and it's for us to take advantage of that. For example, whilst everybody's excited about generative AI, the thing that's exciting me the most about generative AI is the ability to get it to translate old COBOL legacy code into Java. It's just a language. If you can translate from French to German, why can't you do that? And Richard and I, we've got some, pilots going on, which, if you combine that, it has an accelerating effect on getting out of that legacy world. So, generative AI is part of the answer in how we're going to reform our technology.
That's always so interesting. And it's part of my job up here to play the devil's advocate a little bit, so bear that in mind while I ask this question. You talk about frictionlessness. Frictionlessness not only in the way that citizens and users encounter these systems, but also in the way that the internal processes of adoption could become so much more frictionless. It involves so much less technical expertise and know-how. Do you think that part of the internal institutional resistance to some of the things you just said comes from a concern for resilience? That when you move to frictionless systems, you also move away from legacy technologies where someone in a senior position can point to a person and say, oh, that guy knows, Steve knows how to fix that system. It's resilient, it'll hold up. If everything comes crashing down, it'll hold up. I wonder, based on some of the conversations I sometimes have with civil servants, whether that's a factor here. Is that?
I think that's part of it, of course, but there's many things that come into it. I think there's ego, right? I'm the CDIO for HMRC. I run one of the biggest IT departments in the country. You won't get many CIOs or CDIOs like me saying, in the future, you will write your own code. You won't need my team. People like, we want to protect our jobs. We want, So there's this kind of divide that exists. That's where the technical experts are, and that's where the policy experts are. And I think we need to bridge the gap between the two. I think a lot of it is driven by behaviors and ego about, for 40 years, I've been an Oracle DBA, and this guy has come along starting to tell me I need Anaconda and Python, and oh God, these things sound like snakes to me. This is a completely different language. I don't understand any of this. So you know what? I've got to stick to Oracle, and I'm going to find a way of prolonging this debate. It's a reality. People get comfortable, they develop learned behaviors, and they get entrenched in those positions. But we've got to break out of that, because what I'm sharing with you is all doable today. It's, these platforms exist, and private sector maximizes them. Things like software as service platforms for customer relationship management, CRM and analytics. I've got one last thing, yeah? One last thing. I think the other thing we need to break through is this cycle of, especially when it comes to data, give me your requirements, and I will then build your data solution for you. I think when you do that, you may as well draw a Gantt chart with a diamond on it to say, I will fail at this point, right? Because it's an absurdity to ask people who are desperately trying to get insight to tell you what they want, right? They don't know. They don't know. So you create this contract written down with every I and T's dotted, etc., and you hold them to account. The minute they figure out something new, you say, well, it's not what you asked for, right? And therefore, how do you break that? And I think from a data-specific sort of conversation, you can break that by saying, as long as you have the right security clearance, you can have access to all the data. You show me that you've got what level of security clearance you have, and I will make it all available to you. I will no longer ask you, what do you need? What do you need it for? Spend 10 years in workshops, come back with a plan. I'll say, well, all the data is available. If you've got the right sort of security clearance, off you go. I don't need to be in this anymore. You can use, I don't know, partners to come and help you get that insight if you want. But we don't operate like that. We say, give us your requirements, I will go away, design it, I'll then deliver it, and then you'll say, I needed it 6 months ago, and it's wrong, and why did it cost so much? So we've got to break through that.
Thank you very much, Daljit, and I apologise to everyone here that I advocated for higher friction user experience at a data conference. I now understand my error, and I will try to remediate my ways. We're going to go straight to the Q&A now. Let's take them in sets of 2. That seems to be an optimal number for this sort of panel. We'll see how we get along. Please do, as people have already with the Alex Q&A, introduce yourself before asking your question as well. Yes, I've got a lady here just next to you, Manisha. Yes, in the beige coat. There we go.
Hi. Oh, is that on? Yes. Hi, I'm Emily Morrison. I'm the director of the Institute for Community Studies. So we work on citizen deliberative democracy and engagement methodologies. And thank you so much. This is absolutely fascinating, provocative discussion. I think we've heard a lot about being data-driven. I'm not sure we've heard much about being citizen-centered, which is the second part of the conference. And I suppose my question comes from the fact that people's lives, the users you're talking about, or citizens or consumers or whatever you would like to call them, are much more complex now. We've got the biggest variations in spending power and debt, in terms of what affordability means now. We've got the greatest difficulties in terms of health inequities and health outcomes. We've got hybrid forms of working that we never had before and vastly unequal distribution. We've also got a generation that can't leave home necessarily, and a social care crisis at the other end of the scale, whilst we're asking people to work in careers that are less linear and more complex than ever before. So my question is, we've heard a lot about what the citizen values. How confident are you all that you know what that is? And that's not just about their interactions with you through data. That's actually about the outcomes that these data systems will deliver, because I haven't heard anything about how you know what that user experience and the outcomes the data delivers needs to be for the complexity of the people's lives that we now have in our citizen population.
Thanks so much, Emily. Let's take another question. Hands up. Yes, this gentleman.
Thank you. My name's Simon Eccles. I'm currently at Salesforce, but was previously running data in the NHS. And I'm just going to revel for 2 seconds in Daljit's quote of, we should move to a cloud-native SaaS platform with built-in analytics capability and a low-code base for case management, which is now my slogan. I'm adopting it. Thank you. We're having that.
I'll take the tax off you.
Trust me, you already do. But my question was, having spent with Rich actually years in the NHS, with a real challenge of not invented here and we're a bit different. And I don't know how this applies across other sectors. So watching teams trying to build from scratch capabilities that industry has off the shelf. And a recent conversation I had with a government department that should remain nameless but comes up later on, of we don't do marketing, I quote. And I said, well, hang on, do you send people letters in the hope that they are going to do something different as a consequence of receiving the letter? Breast cancer screening having a 62% take-up at the moment, which is below the threshold at which it makes its biggest difference, to which the answer is, yes, of course we do. Well, that's marketing, and there are whole swathes of industry that specialise in how to get people to take up more of behaviour you're driving to them. How do we get over that barrier of adoption, because it's not what we do here?
Two excellent questions. I'm sure the panel will agree. Emily was asking about how we can really capture, or what efforts we should be going to capture the actual outcomes that will drive the outputs and outcomes that citizens expect to see on the ground. Richard?
It's interesting because actually both, you can join those two questions up in a solution.
Okay.
So we do focus an awful lot on user-centered design. How do we work with citizens? And I hate the word users, so I'm going to try and avoid that as much as possible. How do we work with citizens? We have to have a solution that is good, not great, I think. And that's back a little bit to what Daljit talked about accepting the risk, maybe even finding ways to accept the sun headline. Because what we've got to do is work out, how do we satisfy 80% of citizens with the digital solution that's straight through, to free up the 20% of people who actually need to sit in front of a citizen, hold their hand and help them through the process. Currently, we don't do the digital solution until it's 100% of citizens that it can look after, and therefore it's never going to get there. Simon's point about marketing and that side of it fits neatly into there, because if we can find ways to take our data collectively and personalise in whatever way that means the services that government offers our citizens, then we can actually get to each of those people you talk so eloquently about with the right services at the right time, which also falls back into the frictionless comment at the end. I can only be 10% less friction in my services that I deliver than Daljit, because if I'm more frictionless in what I offer, as it's been said quite bluntly to me, you will bankrupt UK PLC. If I give more money out quicker than Daljit collects it, funnily enough, there isn't enough money in the bank to do that. And therefore, that frictionless comment in that personalisation route that is truly marketing across, I think, every government department in reality. We need to stop thinking that's a dirty word. The ability to take these off-the-shelf solutions and reuse them in the way that, forgive me, but retailer for the last 3-4 years has done so eloquently and so well for 10-15 years is something that we can and should be proud to steal and reuse.
Sue, do you have a view on this?
Yeah, so obviously I sit above any of the kind of direct service delivery and design. But for me, your question resonated with, I suppose, the last point that I was making around that whole accountability, fairness and transparency of approach. So I think, Rich, you've touched upon it a little bit, but just to take it a bit further, when organisations are thinking about a new service design, or even kind of a policy initiative that may be very complex in the way that you've described, the one thing that we would absolutely want organisations to be doing is thinking about the ethical dimensions of that. And I know from the work that we do with different departments and with organisations like the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, that is starting to be mainstream. So kind of thinking about from the offset, we have this kind of outcome service in mind, as well as engaging with our citizens and other groups around the design of that. We need to understand what the ingestion of different data sources might mean in terms of the insights that are being kind of given to us to support that design or support that delivery. So just touch upon that point.
Very helpful. Ed, did that point about marketing and the appetite for it resonate with your experience?
It did, yes. I don't know if I'm so qualified to answer the second question, but if I don't mind, I'll turn to the first one, because outcomes, I think, is such an important point to talk about in this whole debate. So, just to kind of share, again, a private sector BT perspective here. So I talked a lot earlier about some of the efficiency gains that having a joined-up data architecture can deliver, so a more efficient operation. But what about customer? And customers and citizens broadly want the same type of thing. They want a low-touch, seamless interaction with their provider. So if we don't get that right as BT, we lose business. And it is now a key battleground. BT is rebranding its consumer operation to EE. And central to that is a new application, which is a single sign-on, and it's all about that customer intimacy. You can see your complete customer journey, you can amend various services you take from us, and there's a lot of other personalised data that goes in there. So, to your point about outcomes, the outcome, I think, needs to be better outcomes for citizens, not just on the kind of efficiency side and the gains, everything else that data can deliver.
Daljit, there are some things that government do that will create different levels of how the citizen interacts with it. So we might talk glowingly about how nice it would be for an extremely efficient way of taking taxes from people, and to make that as seamless and effortless as possible. But actually, encountering the citizen or the community perspective on those kinds of questions will get us to one kind of conversation, when actually we need a kind of a meta-level conversation to understand how they want to interact and what kind of deeper outcomes they expect from the systems they interact with. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant question. We put a lot of investment in user-centric design, customer panels, qualitative research, speaking to customers, segmenting our base, recognizing where we've got vulnerable customers, as do you, right? As does BT, I'm sure. But whether all of that is actually getting to the heart of what's the outcome the citizens are looking for. You should know, but we're on a journey at HMRC to sort of actually create the marketplace. So with our sort of making tax digital, when it eventually lands, we've already done the VAT migration. We're now doing the next part of the tax. That is us being disintermediated. That is, our APIs are there, they're public. If you're a startup company and you are a tax accountant and you want to create a product for your customers that you know really intimately well in your community, then you've got the system that up until now has been shielded from you. It's been with us. Our APIs are open. You can now integrate your tax into systems like, your Sage accounting software and other pieces. Quite where that will go, I don't know, but I think we will see that that market is going to be created for some of these services as we get more and more to the open API world. It'll be across the whole piece. Some government departments already do it, right? So, and then some arm's length bodies like Transport for London. I mean, how many times have you now seen an app that tells you where your tube is or where the train is or the bus is? These things have been done because somebody thought it's a good idea to just open up the competition and get innovative companies to start creating apps. I think that's coming to all of us. And with that comes a second question. If there is a market being created, then we have to do the marketing, and we have to take what, I sometimes pretend, what would it be like if I did an MBA? And it'll be every moment of truth is your opportunity to educate, to advertise. So, 49 million calls that we get, 29 million letters that we get and reply to. They're all opportunities for us to achieve that better information sharing, that marketing message, that kind of easier way to do business with us, and the promotion silently through that mechanism of you can always use our digital services. If you want to click here, a short video will be played to show you how, rather than, we're experimenting. So we said, right, okay, we're getting too many phone calls, we've got too many people, we've got to reduce our staffing levels back to the pre-pandemic levels. Let's switch off the telephony for this service for a month. And you saw the headlines, but that was an experiment so that we can learn from and adapt and react to the situation accordingly. So now we've built entire strategies around that. So I think the two get linked up with, whether we want it or not, we are heading towards that disintermediation.
And the kind of reactivity we've just heard about could create an even more radical potential where communities and citizens can use these platforms to influence back and to help reshape the kinds of interactions that are possible as well.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. All right, a couple more questions I think would be very welcome. Yep, let's have Lara down here. Lara.
Thank you, Lara Stoimenova. I'm a trustee on the Reform think tank. We talked a lot today about the opportunities that obviously data provides us at a level or individual citizen or company or UK PLC. But what about the risks? Because as a citizen, I'm worried about fraud, identity theft. At a country level, I'm worried about cyber terrorism. And the more our lives moves online and become digital, the bigger these risks are. Are you doing any developments basically in government to try and understand these risks and mitigate them?
Crucial question. Thank you so much. And yes, I've got a gentleman near the back row there in a black shirt. And yeah, that's my guy.
Hi all. Kostav Haldar. I myself am an AI engineer, and I lead our AI services within government. Now, my question is to Daljit, because he touched on a very interesting concept about if you have a Gantt chart at the end, this is when you're going to fail, you look at. Yeah. Now, we all know that if you look at the data long and hard enough, it will show you what you want to see. And that boils down back to the requirements point. Yeah. Now, my question more is around the skill set. We all know that to deliver any kind of program, it's not just a scientist you need. You need an engineer beside it. You need a DevOps person beside it. You need a cloud engineer. Private sector, financial services, partners, all firms are really hungry for those niche skills. And with technology changing so much and at such a pace, how do you think government organizations are coping with the skills that they need today as well as what they will need in the future? And how do you hire them, but more importantly, retain them to make them more talented and skilled at what they're doing?
Thank you. Well, Daljit, that was for you, so do you want to pick it up?
Well, I mean, we're doing so much in that space. We've got our own boot camps, training programs, learning and development. We've created our own internal concept of a university, trying to upskill our teams, our people. There's a huge amount going on. But what we mustn't do is train them in that world of today, right? So let me share an example with you. My wife collects sort of first edition books, and over the years she's taken up all the bookshelf at home. And I said to her, look, it's about time we kind of just catalogued all your books to see in case there's something really valuable in there, or something we should change our insurance policy for, let's say. And I'm not ashamed of it. I went on ChatGPT. I said, write me a program in Python that will read the ISBN number and tell me the catalogue of that book. And you know what? Within 20 seconds, I had a running program. I then said, right, tell me how, extend this program so that you can read the ISBN number from a photo, right? About an hour later, I had that working, right? Okay. I then said, this is going too slow. Can you turn it into C++? Another few hours later, it was working in C++, which is a much faster programming language. And I'm sitting there as CDIO thinking, where are the future skills going to come from? And I'm looking at this, right, thinking, actually, what we need what we think we need today, like more developers, more DevOps, more engineers, is not where it's going to be. It's going to be, how am I going to guarantee that somebody's not going to come knock on my door in 6 months' time and say, that code that you've used in this app is my copyright. That ChatGPT went on the internet and read one of my articles and took it and put it, I'm suing you, right? Where are we going to get people who are going to know how to detect the bias in these decisioning systems? How to ensure that we've got a good, solid foundation for data, using data responsibly and following frameworks of ethics. You know, so why I'm saying that is I'm less and less worried about engineers and software developers. And yes, I am worried about them. But I'm more and more worried about, because whether we like it or not, more and more of this stuff's going to be embedded in what we use, right? And you don't have anybody in your organization that, you know, you might end up with, oh, I'm using Microsoft Copilot to create a new PowerPoint presentation, and something in there, there's a logo in there that it's ended up scanning from the internet, and, you know, you're now in breach of trademark laws and things of that type. So we need to start thinking in the sort of post-knowledge world. That I think that's where the true skills gaps are. It's in how to use this technology responsibly, because one thing that's definitely going to happen is it's not just going to arrive. The rate is a second order rate now. We used to talk about speed of change. It's actually no longer about the speed of change. It's about the rate at which speed itself is, a velocity. It's about acceleration. And you saw that chart with how they went from... So we're not going to be able to stop it. We're going to have to think about who we got in our organizations who understand this technology and the implications of using it. Because I think there's a brilliant case for how we can all be more productive if we work that out.
Did you want to comment on this?
Yeah, just I think it's a really interesting point that you raise. I come at it with a slightly different angle. So kind of going back 8 or 9 years when the Cabinet Secretary's Horizon Committee or some such was thinking about data science and other things. And I was tapped on the shoulder, as often you are, aren't you, in Whitehall, and will you start up a programme? And so that's how kind of some of the early work around data sharing pilots, some of the data science pilots and data science capability came about. And one of the big myths that we had to bust was that data scientists are like unicorns. You know, they're these individuals who've got these amazing multi-level skills that you will not find anywhere in the civil service. Right, okay, there's a challenge for us. And certainly there were some ways of working that were different, but what we started as a small cross-government team was entirely experimental, entirely try it, and if we break it and fail, you know, nothing ventured, nothing gained really. And that's how the Data Science Accelerator programme started. And we took a handful of people from the different analytical professions and gave them, here's a shiny Mac, here's the one data scientist who was in the government digital service, and we're going to take you on an adventure for 12 weeks with mentoring, and you got a business project. And that, you know, did a helpful thing of starting to upskill the community, because it's kind of continued to this day. But also broke this myth that suddenly advances in data and advances in technology meant that it was some otherworldly skill set that just didn't exist before. And organisations came on that journey and kind of the penny dropped of where the focus and where the skills needed to be. And I'd say, you know, entirely with you, Daljit, but I'd say in today's world, you know, where we are right now, we do need to focus on data ethics and data management practices around the data ownership, data maturity understanding. And I'd say if kind of 9 years ago we were able to look at the analytical cadre in government and say, you are the basis for us developing data science skills, I'd say ethicists, you know, in any policy formulation, you're thinking about the complexity. You know, there will be data ethicists from the policy community. You've got an interest in data. And probably in that kind of data management, data governance space, we've got finance people and auditors. It's kind of forensically going through things. So I think we need to think about not, you know, how are we going to compete with the private sector, but how do we take the brilliant skill sets that we have across the public sector and think about kind of the relearning, the university type approach that you're taking in HMRC.
It makes sense. I think government departments have those skills, don't they? And I think if you play back to the first question as well, we can't do the cool stuff without absolutely thinking about the protection stuff. What is interesting is that the new technologies that keep coming up so much sat up here today will also help us hugely with the protection of as well. So being able to know where data's going, where data's gone is far easier now with new technology than it ever was 10 years ago when others were trying to work out how you join data up. Our ability to use, you know, Copilot, and there are other tools available to help with managing cyber threat and security there. I also think, though, that what is fascinating is that curve that was on the slide that Daljit just raised again has also alerted everybody to what can be done with data. And that, therefore, is putting citizen excitement and citizen concern front and centre for us all as well. So we can't do anything but be protectionist in data, because citizens are now aware of what Gen AI is. You know, when my mum, who's 78, is using it, and when my son of 11 is using it to do his homework and getting caught, you start to realise how prolific it takes for that curve to create that hockey stick. And therefore, everybody is aware of the risks around consent, what they do, what we do with data, and where that goes. So I think it now is a platform for building all of this stuff, the academy, the university, and all that side to it as well.
How did you get caught out of interest? Not for personal reasons.
So he was given ChatGPT and told he could experiment. He's 13 years old. He went upstairs and did his French homework, but he did come downstairs with a piece of learning, back to Daljit's comment about his appy bill. So he got ChatGPT to do his translation in the style of a 13-year-old who's due to get a C in his French homework. So he didn't get caught, he admitted to what he did.
He confessed. Well, that's ethics in the use of data. I think we have time for two more very quick questions before we hand over to our next panel. Let's hear from Simon here from BT, and then the gentleman at the back there.
Can I pick up your point, Daljit? I'll take the mics on. So about a decade ago, there was a line of JavaScript in some Google functionality. So Mr. Ellison and Larry Ellison and Safra Katz sued Google. The result was 3 years later, a £100 million settlement. I won't go into any more detail, but your point is really apposite. I think we're missing something on the panel. I think we're missing lawyers, right? I know that sounds really difficult to say because who wants a lawyer in a room, really? But actually, I think it's a great opportunity for a wild west of creativity, innovation. But having been at BT, and Ed will know this as well as I do, we have a bevy of lawyers who like to get involved with things and make life go a little bit more slowly. So where is the balance between innovation, creativity, and pace, to your point, Ed, and also the ability to have common sense and legal frameworks? And I think those two things are poles apart at the minute, and I think they need to come closer together. So I'd appreciate a comment from anybody on the panel, really.
I think Sue tackled that, though, in sort of the skills do exist in civil service. It's on us in each department to work out how we pull those skills together and bring them to react to the challenge. So in DWP, we have the Lighthouse programme, bringing ethicists, legal, procurement, cyber, data and digital people into one function to go after the 6 things that are most business impactful for Gen AI. So we're doing exactly what Sue said, is not trying to create a new team that does it, but to pull all these people that have got those skills, set them in a room and say, it's on you to teach DWP how to do this, and we're sharing that with HMRC and others. So I think we get it. It's just not being formalised and shouted about, and maybe it should be a bit more formalised and shouted about.
We're in that pioneering stage of, through experimentation, not being afraid of this is the first step, but in a controlled way, learn as much as we can. And the lawyers need to be in there. They need to, not only are they big beneficiaries of this generative AI for their case work, but that, you know, you can get in so much trouble with in an innocent way unless you get, and they will slow you down, but it's a worthwhile investment. And as well as the ethics, we need the legal framework. And we need to make sure that whatever we do, we follow the law. You know, a great deal of care is taken. Every piece of data that we have, before we share it with anyone, it goes through a legal gateway. Teams of lawyers look at it. It's only when they say, okay, you're not breaking the law, that we actually exchange data amongst ourselves, even between different departments. So yeah, I mean, just to build, the one topic that I get summoned for the most to the board and the ExCom committee is cybersecurity. There's just so much attention being paid to it, rightfully so. But the thing we ought to worry about, and this is where that acceleration piece kicks in. So if this is narrow AI, basically all we're seeing is one use case called a large language model come out of the lab after 30 years into the public domain. If this is the level of disruption that one use case is creating, can you imagine how it starts to, as it starts to get more generic, more general AI, that you know, how different the world will be from that perspective. And then you've got the prospect of quantum computing. So we ought to be aware that although today's best encryption standards that protect all our data are safe because they're all built around large number factorization and prime number theory, which the best computer in the world today would take hundreds of years to crack. So therefore we think it's all safe. Those that do us harm are watching the world of quantum computing arrive, which will make all those encryption standards redundant. And what they're saying is, if I steal this data today, even though it's encrypted, I'm not afraid of that anymore because I'll harvest it until better computers arrive, and then I'll be able to decrypt it. So we've got to be aware of that. We've got to think about how are our suppliers going to protect us in that world, because it's fast becoming more and more, I don't know, it's gone from science fiction-y kind of talk to more and more, actually you can come and play with our quantum computer is what we hear all the time, isn't it?
Well, I never thought I'd have to ask this question, but is there a lawyer in the house who we can... No, okay, we don't have to. I have a gentleman who's been waiting very patiently, and then we're going to end the session. So your question, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Jack. I'm from Global Government Forum. Many of the panel will know who we are. It's good to see you all again. So you spoke to this a fair bit just now, so sorry to make you perhaps repeat some of your points, but if you could put a finer point on some of them there. I'm thinking about talent acquisition and retention and about public trust. So the next generation of talented tech brains, what would you say to them, really, if they were standing in front of you, to persuade them that despite historic low levels of trust among a generation in government, their skills are best used to help public service delivery?
Great question. What a lovely final question. Sue, did you want to take that first, or do you want a bit more time?
I think Daljit's itching to come in.
I tell you why, because it's a question I think about very often, and the way I think about it is this. Up until now, we've said to school leavers, graduates, apprentices, yeah, great, you've got a degree in computer science and you've learnt Python, but we use Oracle, and now you're going to go on a 3-month training course to learn Oracle. We've been guilty of ignoring what they've brought with them. and to almost like engage with them in a way to say, forget that stuff now. We're going to teach you how we do it, which is very proprietary, very sort of licensed world. And I think what I would say to somebody is, I want you to change me and my organization by using what you've learned. And if you've learned to code in Python, then I want you to show me and the rest of my team that world and what we've been missing out on, instead of, I use this package, you're now going to go off and learn that, and by the way, great, you got that degree or that qualification, but it's of no interest to me anymore, yeah? That's how, and I think we're missing out on learning from the new generation, because they are being trained, but they're not being trained on expensive software. They're being trained on open source, free stuff. And increasingly, that's what our future looks like.
Should I come down the line with that question? Ed, do you have a view on what we should be saying?
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of just really conclude by saying, I mean, I think the expression goes with great power comes great responsibility. Yeah, yes, exactly. And I think, you know, that is worth reflecting on, because we are now the custodians of this data, and it's our responsibility, both as government and industry, to keep that data safe and secure, but also the integrity of that data as well. So to the skills point, you know, you could give a data set to two entirely separate data scientists, and they could come up with a completely different conclusion based on the variables that they apply on that data set. And for me, that's worrying. That's worrying as a citizen. And I think as we develop skills, we need to be consciously aware of, when we look at data, when we manipulate data, when we use data, we understand how those variables are being applied, and how, when we are training people and as part of learning a software language, it's not just about you learn Python or C++, it's you understand the actual bias and implications of how you work with data.
And I think it's been said that we're talking to people about teachers, as Daljit said, learn from us, but have a mission. Having recently come back to public sector civil service, having a mission, back to the citizen comment, to do good, to look after vulnerable people, to try and make this thing work, is something really laudable. I think the other thing as well is, this isn't an expectation that you come here for the rest of your life. Come, teach, learn, have a mission, go away, do something else, and maybe you're excited enough to come back in a few years as well. And I think if we accept that, we end up in a better place as well.
And for me, it's you can make a difference. Working in the public sector, you absolutely can make a difference. And working in digital and data, increasingly, you can make a difference as well.
What a lovely thought to end on. Please, everyone, join me in thanking our fantastic